The hush began every night at 19 o'clock UTC, a single soprano note that glimmered out of every loudspeaker, earbud, and bedside teddy across the planet. Children called it the dream song, engineers called it the global lullaby broadcast, and physicists with a taste for drama called it the net of retention. Whatever the name, the melody was simple, 5 notes descending like rain, then 5 ascending like sunrise, repeating on a loop, almost too gentle to notice. Yet the line between sunrise and annihilation was woven through those notes, because in its folds the monsters slept. No one had expected the Umbrae to be musical. They were probabilities, after all, ragged possibilities torn loose during the first accelerator accident under Lake Baikal. In 2079, when the superposition experiment snapped, the uncollapsed wave functions of God knew what seeped out like invisible gas turned inside out in a 100-kilometer radius. Midnight commuters discovered duplicated versions of themselves whispering in the back seats. Most of the Umbrae never coalesced long enough for photographs. They were maybes, waiting for some cosmic coin flip to pick heads or tails. It turned out that sound-structured, sustained, and full of overtones confused the coin. The right pattern kept probabilities from making up their minds. A mathematician named Dr. Shun Li wrote a lullaby on her cracked piano during the disaster's second week. Broadcast through a repurposed emergency siren, the lullaby pinned every Umbra in a suspended maybe state. The monsters never fully vanished, but they never fully arrived either. You could stand in front of one, its outline flickering like candle smoke, clause suggested, but not resolved. And it would remain an unfinished sentence, provided the song did not stop. 40 years later, the dream song rode on 12 satellites called the CradleNet. Each carried a chorus of AI-tuned speakers, atomic clocks, and a thrumming low-frequency bass line sampled from whale song. Infants in Lagos fell asleep to it, pensioners in Reykjavik swore it soothed arthritis, and the whole species learned to ignore its barely perceptible heartbeat in the background of life. Nobody wanted to imagine the alternative. The last time the world endured silence, 14 minutes of broadcast outage in 2098. An Umbra materialized near Christchurch and ate half the harbor before the music rebooted. Soren Hill was a junior harmonics engineer in the orbital control room over Reykjavik, and at 1859 UTC, on an Arctic June evening, he stared at the telemetry graph with his customary half-terror. Every point on the blue line represented amplitude integrity. Any dip meant a lullaby note might distort, and distortion led directly to collapse. He mouthed the words of the song under his breath, descending, ascending like a talisman. The overhead lights dimmed. Kernel update, he thought. Routine maintenance always happened at 1910, safely after sync pulse. But tonight the dimming wasn't a scheduled fade, it was a judder, as though the power grid hiccuped. A second later, every console spat red. Source 2 drop, the alert screamed. Soren's stomach performed a neat origami fold. Source 2 carried the alto harmony. Without it, the lullaby's quantum entanglement matrix lost phase coherence in 90 seconds. "Sat-6 is off vector," the supervisor shouted. "We've got Doppler drift guidance gyros offline." Somebody cursed in Icelandic. Someone else prayed in Yoruba. Soren's eyes, fixed on the cascading warnings, caught a single damning line. Not hardware. Signal interference. Which meant sabotage, or at least malicious code. "Initiate ground resonance protocol," the supervisor ordered. Instantly, every screen flipped to a schematic of the fallback plan. The Planetary Rhythm Brigade, 13 city-scale drum arrays coordinated to thump in perfect counterpoint with the surviving lullaby channels. If melody staggered, rhythm could still hold the Umbrae in limbo for approximately 40 minutes, long enough, in theory, to patch the broadcast. People assumed the brigade was computerized, an automated network of seismic transducers. In truth, almost every drum array required a flesh-and-blood conductor, someone whose pulse sync had been recorded as a steady anchor, less prone to algorithmic drift. And the anchor of the Reykjavik array, indeed, of the entire Atlantic Hemisphere contingency, was Captain Tala Mensa, a deaf former Marine who felt sound like weather through her bones. Tala did not wait for a summons. When the lights blinked the second time, she was already sprinting down the corridor, silver sticks tucked under one elbow, shaved head luminous beneath emergency strobes. Soren had met her only once at an accreditation banquet, but her presence was unforgettable, a woman carved from momentum. She paused long enough to sign a question status, and he fumbled to answer in clumsy gestures because she refused to read lips while running. Alto line dead, he managed aloud while signing approximate equivalents. Monsters slip in 90. She nodded, pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, and felt her own pulse, as if winding a watch. Then the corridor swallowed her. The brigade's practice hall lay beneath the city's old lava tubes, a cathedral of basalt columns fitted with myriads of membrane plates the size of trampolines. Each plate was tuned to a slightly different frequency. Together they could produce a polyrhythmic field capable of vibrating continental crust. Tala's 12 percussionists, diverse in nationality, neurotype, and taste in tattoos, were already strapping themselves into harness rigs when she arrived. The harnesses allowed them to stand on tilted platforms above the drumheads, body weight translating into avalanches of sound with every stomp. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Her hands flew, downbeat in 15 seconds, standard tether pattern. Follow my back. If I drop, Gita takes baton. No one asked questions. They clipped wireless haptic implants behind their ears, silent for them, but rich with tactile feedback. And angled to face Tala's shoulders, she raised her left drumstick, felt the hum of danger in her jawbones, and brought the stick down. Whum! Above ground, Soren felt the impact through the soles of his shoes. The arrays were supposed to be infrasonic, yet the first beat shivered coffee mugs off desks. The second beat rode the first like thunder chasing lightning, and then the sequence settled. 6 strokes in a heartbeat cluster. 2-second pause, 6 again. It was not melody, but it was rhythm, and the universe fond of order paused to listen. Telemetry steadied. Umbrae probability density dropped from alert red to jittery orange. But the fix wasn't holding as long as simulations promised. Every 30th second the phase error spiked anew. Sat-6, still tumbling, continued to inject noise into the broadcast. Soren tapped commands with shaking fingers, requesting remote thruster fire, but the attitude control software returned a cold, polite denial. Primary keys revoked. Whoever sabotaged the lullaby had been thorough. He thought of the Christchurch harbor, of teeth dissecting boats like fruit, and of his little brother back in Calgary who slept under the lullaby's indefinite mercy. He swallowed, turned to the supervisor. "We need manual access," he said. "I can patch an auxiliary antenna into the accompaniment channel, but only if we shut Sat-6 up entirely. The jamming signal originates from its high-gain dish." "Manual how?" the supervisor asked. Mag slid to the dish hub. Soren answered before his courage could die. "I did my extravehicular cert last quarter. That's a suicide stunt. So is letting probability demons eat Reykjavik." The supervisor hesitated no longer than a breath. "Suit up." 10 minutes later, Soren was in the airlock. The plan was terrifyingly straightforward. Ride a tethered sled along the maintenance rail that circled the station, reach the crippled satellite's docking coupler, and manually decouple its transmitter array, essentially yanking the loudest trumpet from an off-key orchestra. The station's orbit made close approach possible for exactly 3 minutes, each 90-minute cycle. Miss that window and Sat-6 would drift out of reach. With helmet sealed, he could just hear the pounding from the lava tubes relayed through structural vibration. Even in space, the beat found him, like a phantom heart. The countdown hit 0. Magnetic clamps released. Soren and sled shot into star-raw vacuum, headlamps knifing darkness. Earth spun below, a swirl of indigo and cloud fire. Statistics about radiation, debris, and oxygen flickered on his visor, but louder in his mind was Tala's rhythm. 6 strokes, pause, 6 strokes. At the drum raise, Tala sensed the beat sagged whenever her team's energy flagged. She pushed harder, coaxing crescendos from muscles already hot with lactic acid. Sweat darkened her jumpsuit, Sign language became impossible mid-flurry, so she relied on prearranged nods. Gita mirrored her footwork on the eastern flank. Arturo hammered triplets to fill micro-gaps. Together they shaped a pulsing lattice the Umbri could not easily parse. Yet Tala felt the creeping wrongness. Every minute the ground resonance needed a hair more force to achieve the same stabilizing effect. It was like trying to push back tide with driftwood. She had drummed in combat zones to scramble enemy sonar. She had drummed for therapy groups where vibration replaced speech, but she had never drummed against uncertainty itself. The Umbrae were learning. An Umbra's partial emergence registered on sensors as a temperature inversion, pockets of air falling below absolute zero for nanoseconds. Tala's subdermal chip buzzed with each inversion. 1 buzz, 2, 3, like a metronome out of sync. She knew what it meant. Somewhere topside, the chorus of the lullaby was fracturing faster than rhythm could compensate. Soren's sled slammed against the service conduit of Sat-6 with a concussion that jarred his teeth. He latched a climber clamp, hauled himself to the transmitter dish. From this angle, the satellite looked like a diseased sunflower, petals of thermal foil torn, central hub black with char. He located the manual release lever, an ugly orange handle sealed under plastic. A single pull would sever coax lines and cut power to the high-gain amplifier, ending the sabotage, but also ending the alto channel entirely. CradleNet would be down one harmony forever. Redundancy allowed operation with 10 of 12 lines if modulation depth was increased by 0.4%, or so the specs said. No one had ever tested that under live Umbri pressure. "Soren, you're at the 30-second mark," the supervisor crackled in his ear. "Do it now or abort." He gripped the handle. In the reflection of his visor, he saw his own eyes white as planets. He thought about Tala's sticks, about the children leaning into the lullaby, about the monsters waiting on the underside of probability. He pulled. The dish went dark. Data streams on his HUD flatlined. For half a heartbeat, nothing happened. Too little time, he knew, for consequences to reach Earth. Then his comms erupted in layered cheers. Altitude jitter vanished. Noise floor dropped to baseline. More importantly, the dream song's remaining channels surged into clearer phase alignment. "Good work," someone shouted. "Get home." He kicked off the satellite just as micro debris from the severed connectors spat across his arm, slicing fabric. Suit integrity held. He rode the sled's thrusters back in a luminous parabola, one hand clasped across the wound, while down on the planet, Tala Mensa felt the air pressure change. It was subtle, a softening of the room as if heavy curtains lifted. Her subdermal chip stopped buzzing. She cut the team to half tempo, testing the lattice. The Umbri probability graph on the array's wall display dropped from orange to pale green. Relief rushed through her, bittersweet. They had burned through half their glycogen stores, and some would need IV fluids, but the monsters were shrinking back into maybe mist. She ended with 3 final strokes that cracked like glacier calves. Membrane plates resonated, then went still. Sweat steamed in the cave cool air. Silence. Not the catastrophic silence of 2079, but earned, ordinary silence settled around them. If the lullaby were birdsong, Tala reasoned, then her drums were thunder. Both belonged to weather, and weather could sleep now. Above, Soren re-entered the airlock to applause conducted through the metal. His suit readouts showed elevated heart rate, minor lacerations, but he felt incandescent, as if possibility itself had patted him on the head and said, "Well done." Mission debrief happened in the canteen because nobody had emotional bandwidth for formality. Sugar packets, caffeine, and awkward hugs traded hands. Engineers evaluated system redundancy. Algorithms recalculated modulation depths. Someone asked Soren for a statement. He offered that maybe cables should not be so easy to sabotage. Gallo's laughter circled the table. Tala arrived last, shoulders wrapped in a thermal blanket, cheeks still flecked with drum dust. She signed thank you before any interpreter could step in. Soren, half delirious with fatigue, bowed like a court jester. The next 48 hours blurred into diagnostics. 2 satellites were reconfigured to synthesize a virtual alto via phased Nation's quantum computer division. Arrests would come later. For the moment, the world slept in relative peace. Though the lullaby's volume was raised 0.4% everywhere, a barely perceptible compensation that audio engineers nonetheless argued over. On the third day, Tala invited Soren to the lava tubes. The brigade was rehearsing new countermeasures, layering syncopated polyrhythms over sub-bass hums. Earplugs were mandatory for hearing volunteers. Soren wore the special vibro vest designed for deaf musicians so he could feel what Tala felt. She led him to the central podium, placed a drumstick in his hand, and positioned his palm upon the stretched graphene membrane. Whum. The sound was less an auditory event than a geometric revelation, a shape manifesting inside his ribcage. He imagined Umbre skittering at the edge of existence, repelled by the certainty encoded in that beat. Tala's grin was bright enough to read without light. She guided his grip, adjusting angle and force until his strikes matched the squad's grid. 6 strokes, pause, 6. His arms tingled with the memory of vacuum and stars. The drum under him roared with something ancient and terrestrial. Together they stitched rhythm through being. After the session, they sat on the basalt floor sharing electrolyte packets. The cave's silence fluttered, full of echoes not yet dissolved. Tala tapped his forearm to get his attention, then signed. We brace the song, they fold the dark, both halves necessary. Soren considered that. Somewhere overhead, the lullaby's 5 descending notes were drifting across oceans, holding improbable teeth in check. Down here, thunder waited as backup. A drummer who could not hear yet understood vibrations better than any hearing engineer alive. He signed back, halting but clear. Long as beat holds, we dream. Tala nodded, satisfied. The world would keep its hush for another night, and if the hush ever faltered again, rhythm would stand ready. Between melody and drum skin, the human heart found enough certainty to keep monsters uncertain. In the measured breathing of billions, an empire of maybe things remained maybe, and the future turned unbitten toward dawn.